Hello YouTube, Bane666 here. Welcome to my first video for 2020. Well, kind of. Some of you may be saying, Bane, what are you talking about? I'm pretty sure I saw a video you posted a week or so ago about the rise of Skywalker. Yes, I did technically post that to YouTube in 2020, but I had completed that video in 2019 and posted it to Bitchute at the end of the year, at the end of 2019. So technically that's a video from last year. I was just a bit delayed putting it up on YouTube because I needed a break and I took a couple of weeks off. So this is officially the first new content I'm creating for 2020. And just a short word on Bitchute. If you want to see my videos early, check out my Bitchute. I usually post them there at least a day before I post them to YouTube. I'm doing this to encourage people to use Bitchute because you never know when YouTube's going to kick people like me off. And we all need an alternative, a safety net. Anyway, onto the topic of this particular video. I came across an article earlier today, which I'll go through at the end of the video because that's not going to be the main focus. But that article led me to a website for a Canadian rape relief organisation, which is also a women's shelter, which has been active since the 1970s. And I want to have a look at some of the things on their webpage. Now, the reason why I'm looking at this particular group's webpage is because of a common fallacy I hear anti-feminists often say. They'll criticise the third-wave feminists and then follow it up by saying something like, feminism used to be about equality, or they'll say something like, what feminism has become. These people seem to be under the impression that feminism was once a force of good, which was just about equality and making things equal for women. I hate to tell you this, but that's just propaganda. It's the same propaganda that the third wavers use, by the way, when they say feminism is just equality, which makes it kind of sad that so many anti-feminists fall for it. But I'm going to show you that the second wavers were just as bad as the third wavers, and you might even argue are even worse. Sure, they claim that feminism is just about equality and about helping women, but at its core, it's really about male hatred and female supremacy. Now, let me explain what I mean by female supremacy. These type of feminists believe that women are inherently better than men, that men are inherently evil, that men are bad. It is just in male nature to be bad, right? We're like animals and they're fully formed human beings by comparison. That is female supremacy. It is essentially saying that females are naturally superior to men. And trust me, the second wave was filled with this shit, as we're about to see from this second wave rape crisis centre. Now, just before we get stuck into it, I should also point out I am not saying that there isn't a need for rape crisis centres. Of course, there should be places like this. I just don't like who it's run by. To use an analogy, which may not be perfect, but I think you'll get my drift. I don't have a problem with people teaching evolution. However, I would have a problem with creationists teaching their version of evolution. And if a bunch of creationists opened up, the Evolution Centre, where people could go and learn about evolution, I would have a problem with that. Now, obviously that doesn't mean I'm against the theory of evolution. I'm just against people corrupting it with their ideology. And that's exactly the same with this rape crisis centre. I don't have a problem with organisations providing services like this. I just don't like the ideology of the people who run it. Anyway, let's have a look at this. So on the website of Vancouver Rape Relief and Women's Shelter, we find a post which originally was published in 1981. So this is 39 years ago, almost 40 years ago. And it's called Movement Matters, Vancouver Rape Relief, Who Are We and What We Do. Now, I know this is an old article, but this organisation is still up and running and they still have this up on their website, so It's obviously what they believe in. And back in 1981, yeah, that's right in the middle of the second wave of feminism. So I think this is a good representation of what the second wave stands for. So I'm going to scroll down to the part titled Working with Men.
Working with men. It started as a joke. We'd reached agreement within the collective that we really needed was a house. The next question was, how do we fund this thing? Too bad we couldn't put a tax on rapists, somebody said. We laughed.
A tax on rapists? Well, I guess there would be a large number of female teachers paying that one, wouldn't there? Not that this group of second wave feminists will ever acknowledge that in any conceivable way. Let's continue.
Later we got serious. Maybe there was a way to get men to pay.
Get men to pay. I mean, that's what strong independent women do, right? I mean, women need men like a fish needs a bicycle. Isn't that what the second wavers used to say? Oh, except when it comes to paying the bills, in which case men suddenly become very, very handy. Funny that. It's almost like they want men to fill the traditional role as provider-protector.
After all, we agree that because of society's training in women hating, every man is a potential rapist.
Now let me remind you, this is not a parody. This is an actual feminist organisation, a second wave organisation which has been around for over 40 years, spreading hate and misinformation to the women of Canada. Isn't it great? But all men are potential rapists. Well, no. Only a very, very small percentage of men commit rape. And those men tend to have some fairly serious psychological issues. Many of them have been victims of sexual assault or rape themselves as children. Some of them even by their mothers. Which is another thing we're never going to hear from this group of feminists, are we? Because they much prefer to just paint all men as potentially dangerous rapists. Now, I guess you could look at it from the viewpoint that they don't know which men are psychologically broken, and therefore any man could potentially be a raper. But if we're going to do that, then we have to apply that equally to other groups, right? For example, any black person could be a violent thug. Now let me point out, this isn't something that I personally believe, nor am I condoning it in any way. I'm just using it as an example of how bigoted this particular line of thinking is. But would it be appropriate to go around thinking that any black person is a violent thug? I'm sure the social justice warriors would have a pretty big problem with that. And rightly so. Would it be appropriate to say that all mothers are potentially child murderers? Now we know that 2/3 of children killed by a parent are killed by the mother. So should we treat all mothers as if they're potentially murderers, even though the percentage of children killed by either parent is extremely small? Would that be fair? Would that be appropriate? To judge all mothers based on the actions of a minority? I don't think it would be fair. And I'm pretty sure this group of feminists would have a major problem with that. They would class that as misogyny, wouldn't they? But viewing all men as potential rapists, well, that's perfectly fine. After all, feminism is just about equality, right? And the best way to do that is to label all men as potential rapists. Because there's nothing more equalising than pulling men down and demonizing them every opportunity you fucking got, right? There's a good reason why I'm an anti-feminist.
We racked our collective brains and lives for men who might be willing to help.
All men are potential rapists. Hey, why don't we ask them for some money? I mean, that's a good strategy, right? Men love nothing more than being referred to as potential rapists simply because they were born male, even though they've never actually done any harm to anyone. That would make me want to give all my hard-earned money over. Where's my bank card? Sign me up.
6 names name up. The first step was a letter asking for a straight-out donation. The second step was another letter asking them to come to a meeting and put up some concrete work.
Now, it may surprise you, but I have the actual letter that they sent out to these men. It reads, "Dear potential male raping scum." Well, I think that's a good start. A good strong start to a letter is always important. It goes on to say, "We demand that you give us your time and money. Let's face it, you owe us for the billions of years of males oppressing all women due to patriarchy and icky testosterone, which should be banned." That's a good point. Testosterone should be banned. In fact, let's just ban all males. It would be a much better world, wouldn't it? Fork over the dosh, you scumbags, because you owe us big time, and you are personally responsible for the actions of other men due to the fact you have a penis. Well, that's true. It is actually a patriarchal secret, but all men share a collective penis, which makes us all responsible for the actions of all other men, but only the negative actions. The positive actions don't count. I learnt that in gender studies class. It's signed, "Yours sincerely, the Feminist Hate Collective." Yeah, a very catchy name for a group, I think. But seriously for a moment, talk about being fucking entitled. To have this attitude towards men, that all men are scumbags, all men are potential rapists, all men are dangerous, and you'll see exactly what I mean as we get further into this particular article. But to have that attitude towards men and then to ask them to fund you and come and work for you, volunteer for you, that is extremely fucking entitled. It would be like the KKK asking for donations from black people. I don't think that would go down too well. Yet strangely this group found men willing to donate money and time. Yep, it definitely says a lot about a society which supposedly is made up of men who hate women. Very strange.
Men have always been on our funding committees. Dangerous men, powerful men, government men.
Dangerous men? Wow. Who exactly has been on their funding committees? The mafia? Is Tony Soprano on their funding committee? Tony Soprano, Hitler, and Charlie Manson. No, I don't think any of those men were on their funding committee. I think most likely just normal, everyday men. But, you know, all men are potentially dangerous, right? Because they're men. Of course, women aren't potentially dangerous. Of course not. It's just the men who are potentially dangerous and expected to fork over their money.
Men with the resources to spy on us and pressure us to conform to their idea of how a rape crisis center should operate.
Oh, I see. So these men, these evil, powerful, dangerous men who spy on you, yeah, I'm sure they were actually spying on you. What you're saying is they place conditions on giving you money. Wow. What scumbags. I mean, they should just give you the money with no idea what you're going to do with it, right? I'm sure that won't be abused. Could you imagine that? You imagine someone coming up to you and saying, I need some money for something, and you just give it to them without any idea what they're going to do with it or how they're going to spend it. You know, they could go and spend it on a world trip or maybe on a new car or something like that, but apparently that doesn't matter because we should just trust these women because they're women. And asking questions about how the money might be spent or putting conditions on giving them the money, you know, that's just unreasonable apparently. I guess asking to see financial records before giving more money is a form of spying on these women. Yeah.
Men who call the shots. Government money never comes without strings attached.
Why exactly should government money come without strings attached? I mean, it's a strange thing to think that the government's just going to hand over taxpayers' money without having any conditions or without looking into your organisation to see how you're going to spend it. I would think this is pretty normal and common sense, right? I mean, there are a lot of groups out there who would love government funding, including men's rights groups, which I pretty much guarantee have got zero or next to zero, especially compared to the amount that women's groups have got. It's a strange kind of patriarchy we're living in that apparently teaches men to hate women. Yeah, those powerful men in government must have somehow done away with their patriarchal brainwashing. But yeah, there's lots of groups out there that would love a handout from the government. And the government has limited funding, so it's just common sense to think that maybe they would put conditions on the funding to make sure that the people they're giving money to are going to spend it the right way. It's not your fucking money, okay? You are not owed money from the government. It is not your right to just have money without meeting any conditions. Talk about being fucking entitled. Now, of course, you could argue that maybe the government or maybe these rich and powerful men are putting unfair conditions on this particular group, in which case they should tell us what those unfair conditions are. And if they think those conditions are totally unfair and they can't negotiate to change them, then they should get their funding from somewhere else. Because those who are supplying the funding have the right to put those conditions on that money, be they fair or otherwise.
We've spent long hours of our time negotiating with these men. We've learned to do a juggling act, balancing information and control to keep the money happening. The terms of funding have been clearly theirs.
Yes, because they have a responsibility to the taxpayer.
Men have always been on our funding committees. What's changed is that now we are too. Working with men is not new. What is new is that now we are setting the terms and deciding which men we choose to work with. We're now working with men who are considerably less dangerous to us.
Men who are considerably less dangerous to us. So these men who spend their time and money working for your organisation are still dangerous. They're just considerably less dangerous because they're tame, right? Now, I do have to ask what type of man would work for an organisation like this, which is clearly anti-male. It would be like a black person volunteering to work for the KKK. Why would any sane person do that? I have to conclude that these are self-loathing male feminists, which I'm pretty sure we've all come across before. Anyway, we're almost through this bit, so let's continue.
They are men who have committed themselves, out loud, to doing anti-sexist work.
And by anti-sexist work, what they actually mean is anti-male propaganda and pro-female supremacy work, right? Because that is literally what the second wave of feminism teaches.
The two parts of this are examining and changing their own behavior, and the behavior of other men.
Now, you'll note that this is something that only men need to do because, apparently women are perfect the way they are. It's only men who are born with original sin, right?
And doing concrete work to alleviate the oppression of women. To quote Jay Moline from Real Life, a feminist media collective in Halifax, it's good to know there are some men who can see past their own male privilege.
Yes, unfortunately, feminists who can see male disadvantage and female privilege are very, very fucking rare. Which is another reason why I'm an anti-feminist. Anyway, I'm going to leave it there for now, folks, because I still have the original article that led me to this website to quickly look at, which I'll do after my end credits. But there is much more on this website which I will explore in part 2. I will be looking at why a transition house. Now it's interesting that they called their women's shelter a transition house, considering they're very, very anti-trans. Well, that is, they're against certain trans people. We'll have a look at that next episode. Can you guess which type of trans people they hate? I think you might be able to guess that one. And we'll also have a look at separation, not an option for most women. Yeah, because this group actually advocates for female separatism, where women have little to no contact with any men. So we'll have a look at that in part 2, along with a couple of other things. But that's it for now. So let's have a quick look, just to finish off, at the original article which led me to the Rape Shelter webpage. The article's called "Kill TERFS, Vancouver's Women-Only Rape Shelter Vandalised with Death Threats, Rat Nailed to Door." Well, considering the literally hundreds, if not thousands, of articles telling us how dangerous MRAs are, I guess it must have been those nasty MRAs, you know, the MRA incel pickup artists. I mean, who else could it be, right? I mean, clearly they're all white supremacists and part of the alt-right. And they're the only ones, apparently, that hate feminists. Yeah, must be them. A Vancouver rape relief shelter alleges they had been the target of vandalism and death threats over their women-only policy. TERF is a slur word for trans-exclusionary radical feminists. Is it really a slur word, though? I know it's used in a negative way, but I mean, it basically sums up a type of feminist who believes a certain thing. So, I mean, if you're a TERF, shouldn't you wear the badge of TERF proudly? I mean, MRA is used as a slur, but I don't think it is a slur. I mean, I'm not ashamed of being an MRA. Or a feminist who believes that women who are born biologically female face oppression and have a different lived experience than those born as men. Yes, that's true. Every single woman, no matter what position in society she's in, was clearly born into oppression and is always oppressed, whereas men are always privileged, even the homeless ones, because of patriarchy. So, you know, that makes perfect sense. It all comes down to biology. It says down here, "We have no doubt feminist groups have a lot of enemies. There are men's rights activists and fascists. But in this particular instance, the use of the word TERF obviously explicitly targets us because of our position for working for women who were born female," said spokeswoman Hilla Kerner. Yeah, well, that's interesting, isn't it? Lots of enemies. There are men's rights groups and fascists. Now, I know of no situation where a men's rights activist has spray painted graffiti or vandalized or nailed a dead rat to the door of a rape crisis centre or a women's shelter. But do you know who does do that? Third wave feminists who hate TERFs. Now, I don't like TERFs. I think they're bigoted pieces of shit, and I think the reason why they hate trans women so much is because trans women were born biologically male, and TERFs hate all males. They have a pathological hate for anything, even remotely male. So it's not surprising that they hate trans women who were born biologically male. But it amazes me that MRAs have such a bad rap when it's third wave feminists doing shit like this to other feminists. Yeah, why am I not surprised though? It goes on to say, while the centre does not shelter biological males, their official policy is to serve transgender men who were born female. Ah, I see. So, trans men, perfectly okay. Trans women, well, no, they're not. So it all comes down to how you were born, which is interesting because this particular breed of feminism claims that gender is a social construct. right? That's their whole argument. That's what their ideology is based upon. That gender is a social construct. It's not biological. Yet, their policy is determined by biology at birth. Very, very interesting. It goes on to say, people who were born female are welcome to our services, but they rarely call us because they would not use services from an organisation who is identified with women's services for women, said Kern. Yeah, and maybe also because of all the trans hate. That might be another reason. Our services are open to all people who were born female, even if they don't identify as women. Okay, so once again, I think this is an example of female supremacy. Somehow, innately, anyone who is born female is somehow superior to those who are born male. These feminists say that men are taught by society to be bad, which doesn't make a lot of sense when you think about it, because men are mainly raised by women, yet they grow up to hate women. It doesn't make sense. You would think that more men would not hate women, considering boys are mainly raised by women, that more of them would grow up not to hate women. But apparently not. According to these feminists, all men hate women and they're taught to do so by society. The argument just doesn't make sense though. Unless you assume that all males are born bad, right? That there is a biological component to males being bad and women being good. Now, they're not going to come out and say that because it makes them sound like bigots. It makes them sound like the KKK, who think that black people are born genetically inferior to white people. But I think it's pretty clear from what they're saying here that that's what they believe. If they're willing to take in trans men simply because they were born female, despite the fact that they identify as male, that would suggest that their entire philosophy is built on biology and not social constructs.
Gefühl für alles, doch hierfür nicht. Es gibt ein Wort und ein Gefühl für alles, doch hierfür nicht. Langsam, langsam lösen sich die Meme aus meinem Geist. Schneeflocken gleich in meine Welt, verbrennen auf meiner Haut und machen alles still und hell. Eure Stimmen für immer verstummt.